Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. So glad to have you join us today. Look forward to a time of seeking wisdom together and hopefully gain some wisdom, gain some new insight and some perspectives. As I like to always remind everyone for Wisdom Seeker Live podcast, what we think of as wisdom and how we address that and also give context on it. For us, wisdom is a journey, and that journey is a three-step process, if you will. The journey starts with our gaining knowledge, and especially in today's culture, gaining knowledge is not a difficult thing to do because we're surrounded with it and inundated with it. But hopefully, we also seek out to learn new things on a regular basis. I know I do, something I make a priority. Second step in that process is to take the knowledge that we have gained and begin to get understanding. And understanding means taking the knowledge and internalizing it and using it in our world, our life, to begin to answer questions for ourselves, for others, as well as to try to solve uh, challenges and problems that we have, and hopefully even be able to take that understanding and begin to share it with others. And so that's the second step in our process. And the third and most vital part of this process, though, is when we go from knowledge and understanding to wisdom. And the thing that distinguishes wisdom from knowledge and understanding is our perspective. And that is that we have a much larger perspective than just what happens immediately for us, to us, and so on. And that perspective is so that we begin to see ourselves internally in relationship to others and our relationships externally as well. So, wisdom is that gaining that greater perspective, that bigger view, and especially to be able to see who we are, what we are, and use our knowledge and understanding outside of ourselves and not just focused on how it impacts us. Because at the end of the day, our choices and what we do in life affect other people as well. And for those of us that have kind of a spiritual bent and that look at things from a spiritual perspective, one of the ways we like to put it is that we begin to see ourselves in the world through God's eyes. And that's when we're gaining wisdom. That's when it helps us to be able to make better choices and gain better understanding and learn how we impact not just ourselves, but others as well. So that is the wisdom journey in our process. And so we'd like to start there. And today we're going to talk about an interesting topic, and that is priorities. And I know that many of us struggle with getting our priorities where they need to be. And that's evidenced by the fact that we are looking forward to other things than what we are doing or being in the present. If in our work, we are always living to find the weekend rather than what we're being able to be focused and invested on what we're doing from a work standpoint, or if we're always having regrets, I wish that we had done this or that. Another one that indicates that we've got issues with our priorities is when we're not willing, able to set boundaries, be able to say no. And so I think there's a lot of people out in our world, including ourselves, that struggle with setting priorities. And so we wanted to talk a bit about that today because it's such a key factor. And we just need to begin to set our priorities based on the right things. Welcome, Nestle. Glad to have you and appreciate you being here with us today. Look forward to your comments and questions along the way. And by the way, anyone who joins us, please, we would love to get your comments, questions, because your contribution makes this podcast much more effective and much more productive. So priorities. I think the part of the problem with our priorities is that when we go to set priorities in our lives, we are basing it in the wrong place, if you will. And one of the things, if any of you that have observed my social media posting, especially on LinkedIn, or been a part of this show at any point in time, know that that I'm always looking at who we are based on design, passion, and purpose. And when we began to set our priorities based on our design and purpose, especially, then it changes things. One of the things I learned from a friend here on LinkedIn, I went to a seminar with him. His name's Gary Fry. And one of the things they suggested was just, to me, very insightful and powerful. And they were on the topic of time management. And they made the comment that the key, if you will, is not really time management, but priority management. And when we have our priorities in the right order, we then will set our time based on those priorities. And I believe the challenge is that we have a lot of people that are setting their priorities based on more cultural influence, more ideas of success on what are cultural standards and norms, if you will. For example, and I know this is always a hot topic and there's a lot of debate on it, but success, whether it's based on how much money we have or not. And that's a real challenge because, in my opinion, that is not the only or the best way to measure our success. And so when we look at our life and we say, well, to be successful, I've got to have a lot of money. Then we have a priority misaligned. And if we have that as a primary priority, that's going to cause us to misalign our time, and our priorities will affect what we do, and it will affect how we feel. It's very impactful. And so one of the things, and I will, after the podcast, I will post a link to some information on understanding design and purpose in our lives, so that it is a good first step in setting priorities. But once we understand our design and our purpose, and we begin to align with that in our life, we began to realize what our priorities truly are and began to function in those priorities. And so we just need to make sure that that's how we make choices, that's the basis is based on our design and purpose. And by the way, one of the ways we begin to kind of, if you will, flesh that out is that we then, from our design and purpose, we begin to set our vision. And when we are aligned with our true vision in our life, then other things become in the proper place and proper priority for us. And one of the big misalignments, I believe, today that we see is in our job choices, our careers, because we see a lot of people that are misaligned. One of the pieces of information I always find fascinating, I talk about when recruiting young people, is that we think, okay, the big priority in my career is to go get a college degree. And we go get this college degree that we think, for whatever reason, either it's going to make us more money, more prestige, whatever, choose this college degree. Well, of those that actually get them, which is different perspective, but about 70% of those that attain degrees never work in the field that they have attained a degree in. Their education does not enhance their experience at work. That means there's either a misalignment in our education choice or a misalignment in our work, or both. So we need to really consider, as we develop our priorities, that we base it in the right way, that we choose it based on our design and purpose. And the way we help to drive that is to develop a vision. Quite often people assume that vision is and mission and values is about companies. And I have to disagree with that. I believe and have seen evidence, and there are principles involved that indicate that vision, mission, and values should start as a part of our life and drive what we do in our life. And that's how we begin to set priorities. For me, my vision is to help people find, understand, and begin to live their potential. So as I consider what I'm doing with my time and my energy and my resources, I always look at that vision and say, does this help for me to be able to get further down the road or closer to achieving that vision? And if it doesn't mean I don't do it necessarily, but the question becomes, is it a priority? And so as we have a vision that helps guide us, we establish our mission. And then in light of our values, we can then set better priorities. Sometimes a situation occurs where you have a vision and mission, and something may seem to align with that, but when it comes to your values, something is missing or something is contradictory to your values. At that point, you know how to consider the priorities that you have. Since it doesn't align with your values, maybe you shouldn't do that, either because it's not good for you, not good for someone else. And so having those values, vision, mission, values set up, help us begin to choose our priorities. Because, by the way, we have to choose priorities on a daily basis. You get that phone call from someone wanting you to do something. At that point, you're going to choose a priority. And either you will choose to do it, not do it, or you may say it's okay in terms of priority, but it's a lower priority. Good morning, Rick. Glad to have you with us. And so we're choosing on a daily basis how to set priorities. And one of the other things I've learned that has been so helpful to me, and I'm not even sure where I got this from. Oh, I do remember. I actually took a time management course, let's just say a long time ago. And one of the tips that they gave, and I found this to be very valuable, is the way we can set a priority in terms of our schedule is simply ask a question. And this question is, if I do or don't do something in a given amount of time, hour, day, week, whatever, and will people get hurt or things get broken? And so when we can get to a point where we use that little simple question, we begin to establish priority. If I take this call right now, is it going to affect whether people get hurt or things get broken? And if we say it's not going to matter if I answer it right this minute, then you choose not to. If the call comes in and you see it and you say, okay, this call is really important, so I'm going to stop what I'm doing and take this call. We have then set a different priority because we have concern of the outcome. But if we take that call because we think we need to take every call on the first ring, then we have a priority problem. And don't have Eunice, is glad to have you, dear friend. But just use that question, and it's very effective. In fact, I've been using it so long that I can go through that process in my head in just a matter of moments. But if someone asks you, can you go here with me on X date, you have to ask yourself a question. If I do this and it's on that date, but I don't think I need to, will people get hurt? Things get broken. It helps us to set priorities because on a daily basis, we are adjusting those priorities. The other one that we might add in is this part of who I am and where I'm going. Is it part of my vision, mission, and values? If it's not, then it gives you at least a perspective and a place to say no. And one of the ways that you might explain that is, thank you for the offer, but I have found that this is not doesn't help me, or it doesn't help me help others by choosing to do this. So I'm going to have to say no, thank you, and move along. And along those lines, another tip that helps, and this is a very practical one, but as you understand your priorities, and if you use a calendar, which is a good idea, because if you don't, you likely miss things and all, but use your calendar to set your times based on your priorities. If, for example, during the day, you know that you need a block of time, 30 minutes of just quiet time for yourself. Well, what you do is you put that on your calendar. And if somebody says, can you do this at the same time, you can simply say, and honestly say, no, I've got something on my calendar for that. It doesn't matter that it is not necessarily a scheduled appointment meeting or something, but it is based on your priority and knowing what you need to be healthy. And so blocking out time based on our priority goes a long way to helping us have those boundaries, those parameters. And that includes every aspect of your life. If it is a priority for you to spend time with family, well, block it on your calendar. And somebody reaches out and says, can you meet at this time on this day? And that's when you've blocked out some family time. You can say, not available because I've already got something on my schedule. You have proactively set your priorities using your calendar, or if you use to-do lists, or however you approach your priority setting and your planning for your time. Welcome, Z. Glad to have you today. Always look forward to hearing from you. So setting our priorities becomes important, but more important is setting them based on us and who we are. And I'm not talking about being self-centered and selfish, not at all. Talking about understanding our design and our purpose so that we set our priorities based on that, not on some other norm, some other cultural expectation or something like that. Because what happens is when we are incongruent with our design and purpose, then we are always at odds with ourselves. We are conflicted all the time. And I see it in our culture so much. Again, one of the big ones that I think of that evidences this is people doing jobs, having careers that they dislike, that are not congruent with who they are. And therefore, your priorities get all out of whack. You decide that you need to work this job that doesn't line with your priority. And so you spend all this time misaligned. and your only relief is when you're not on the job on the weekends or whatever. And so if you're always looking forward to the next something, next activity, next day, next event, it's a good chance that you've got a problem with being misaligned with your proper priorities. And if you're always living with regret and apologizing because you weren't somewhere, didn't do something with other people, with your family, whatever, it's a good chance you've got a priority misalignment and you're not approaching your priorities from a place of wisdom. And the value of wisdom in setting priorities is that it helps you to see the much bigger picture, and especially not just how your priorities affect you, but how they affect others, such as family, friends, whatever. And that keeps, being wise about setting your priorities also helps us from getting into a place where we are, if you will, selfish and self-centered. Because what happens is if you become selfish or self-centered and you are looking at things wisely, you will see the impact that has. You will see the hurt or pain or whatever you're causing in those relationships because you begin to see your choices not just about you, but about also how it affects others in your life and in the world around you. So priorities, we have a real problem in much of our culture of having misaligned priorities. And that creates conflict mentally, emotionally, and even at times physically. An example of that is that we decide that we're going to do this very strenuous physical activity with friends because they think it's some kind of fun or somehow demonstrates that we're manly or womanly or whatever. And if we are not careful and it's not in our priority, it's not part of our design and purpose, and we get into it and get involved with it, we can end up at a minimum where you feel awkward and out of place. Second of all, we potentially end up hurt mentally, emotionally, physically because it's not congruent with who we are by design and purpose. And so when we began to think of life and approach life with the proper priorities based on design and purpose and driven through vision, mission, and values, we go a long way to avoiding regrets, avoiding conflict in our lives. We avoid making choices that aren't aligned with our priority and causing us to be miserable more times than not because we're in circumstances that aren't suited to who we are. And so that's what, when I talk about priority, that's where I come from on that. And I'm hoping that it resonates with you all. And I'd like to ask those that are watching right now, do you struggle with priorities? Do you find yourself conflicted a lot? Do you find yourself living for the weekend rather than living each day? When we have misaligned priorities, we find not present in the moment because we aren't congruent and we're always looking for relief, if you will, because we're not congruent. So I'd love to hear from you all if you've got any stories or perspectives on your priorities, and do you struggle with them? And if so, what that looks like, and share your stories, because just me talking all the time is not as effective as us sharing together. So as you go to set priorities, step back and say, is this truly in accordance with my design and purpose? Now, the challenge with many of us is that we've never stopped to ask and learn about our own design and purpose. And therefore, it creates a real challenge in our lives in that we don't even understand that part for ourselves. And that's another place where our wisdom, gaining wisdom about ourselves, is important. And we began to find that design and purpose. And it's not an instant event. And it is a journey that we go through. And at some point, it becomes, very clear. But along the way, there may be levels of clarity as you go through the process. But go through the process. Make the decision to say, who am I? What am I? Based on design. And when I talk about design and purpose, I throw in passion because it's an important part and it's an indicator, but it is not the defining or deciding component, because we get into our passion too much sometimes, and our passions can be misguided, and we can find ourselves theoretically doing something because we're passionate about it, and that passion is not based in, it's not congruent with our design and purpose. Again, an example I like to give because it's mine and it fits me. But if I allow myself, because I enjoy music an awful lot, I enjoy listening to it. And when I'm by myself, I'll sing along with it. And I have even, during my life, I have explored playing musical instrument because I would really have a passion to want to do that. But what I have discovered is I'm not talented or gifted or designed with what I need to be a musician or a singer. And for me to get caught up in the passion of enjoying music and wanting to produce music or sing whatever would be misguided passion, because I know from experience and time in life, and not just a defeatist mindset, but I've explored the idea of those things and know that's not part of my design. And as a result, when I get caught up in music and start thinking, oh, I'd really like to play music or sing or something, I check that based on my design. Because if any of you ever heard me sing, you'd know I definitely am not gifted with a singing voice. So that's what I mean by being careful about your passion, that your passion shouldn't be the driving force. It should be a factor, but not the factor. Let's see. Rick shares a comment. I think we all struggle with setting priorities and getting a good work-life balance. Don't let work become your life. You die, the employer posts your job and they move on. You're just a plaque on their wall. Indeed. In fact, Rick, one of the things that I talk about and Anton and I talk about on a regular basis is really prefer to consider not work-life balance, because work is a subset of life. It's not its own primary part of our life. We should look for congruence in our life, including work-life congruence. That congruence should be in subservient to who we are and our design and purpose. And you're right. When we put work as our only priority, our main priority, we are setting ourselves up for trouble in a lot of ways, and including regret. Now, one caveat to that is when our work is truly aligned with our design and purpose, then it becomes a outflow of who we are, and it becomes a priority, not because of work itself, but because it fits who we are. And the example that I like to think of is, rather than working in a job to make money, the job you work in should be based on a mission for you in your life. It should be a part of that, and that it should even be able to flow in and out of how we live day to day in terms of family. If you're working in a job or career that is aligned with your design purpose, then it will spill over, not in place of or to take over family, but because we're able to talk with our family about what we do and share the value in it. And so, again, it becomes a more congruent part of our life rather than here's my work life and here is my regular life. And that's conflict. And I think a lot of us live in that conflict all the time. Welcome, Karen. Always good to hear from you. Thanks for joining us. And so, priorities. How have you struggled with priorities, or do you struggle with priorities? If not, how do you uh, fit priorities into your life? How do you set priorities for yourself? One of the nice things about having this podcast and having people here is that we bring our own pieces of wisdom together, and two things happen. One, we can gain wisdom without the pain. Second of all, we put our wisdoms together and it begins to make even more sense and give better perspective because of the much bigger picture it helps us see. So, priorities. Are they important? Yes. Because if we don't have alignment with our priorities, we're conflicted. Okay. And we're always living and struggling against ourselves. When we don't have our choices, our day to day routines, our careers, things like that, based on what are our true priorities, we're going to live in internal conflict all the time. And that can be so miserable that it's sad. Part of the reason that we are seeing the shifts in workforce right now is there are a lot of people that have realized that they are in a career that is not part of their priority. And we have people, excuse me, even in their careers 10 or 15 years going, this is not satisfying. It's always a struggle and a battle. And I'm just not going to be miserable like this for a long time. So I'm going to change. I'm going to resign my current position, situation, role, and change directions. And it's even been in the news, the great resignation that's going on. And part of the reason that is occurring is the misalignment in a lot of people's lives. And they're beginning to realize that there's a misalignment. And so, the last I heard that there's an expectation that 40% of the workforce will be resigning in the near future. And we've seen the beginnings of that. So part of the reason that's the case is because of this misalignment of priorities. We aren't set and doing and being what we need to be based on our design and purpose. Another prevalent concept in the workforce right now and is talked about is quiet quitting. People have taken careers, and when you look at the job description, everything described is in that person's weaknesses, not their strengths. And if we're always working in our weaknesses, if we're always trying to accomplish things in our weaknesses, guess what? We're going to struggle. We're going to feel failure. We're going to feel like that we can't do things right. Well, it may be because we are trying to do things in our weakness rather than our strengths. And this is another example of misalignment in our priorities and incongruence in our life. And the more we can begin to find what is priority based on design and purpose, because that's truly who we are, we begin to make better choices, and we begin to even be able to set boundaries better because give you an example, okay, a social thing. I have had people invite me to go do karaoke, and I appreciate the fun and all that, and it's lots of laughs, and it's not intended that everybody has to be uh, an accomplished singer musician to do karaoke, but for some of us to do karaoke is embarrassing, and it puts our friends in a position of going, you can't sing, right? And so I have learned that of social activities that are out there and at times prop popular, that karaoke is just not one that I'm going to go and do. Now I can go and enjoy the time, and listen to others and laugh and things like that. But me going for the purpose of performing is just not congruent with who I am. And when I approach it in that fashion, I can still have fun, and I can avoid my own situations of pain or emotional pain by making priority choices, by setting boundaries. And so, again, having an understanding of our design and purpose, and then develop our vision and mission and values based on it, helps us to be able to set the right priorities. And when our priorities are in the right place, we're not always dealing with conflict internally and sometimes externally over our choices. And when we do that, we expend our energy in a much better way. We're less likely to become disengaged. We're also less likely to stay in a drained state all the time. If you want to stay drained all the time, live in a place where your priorities are not congruent with who you are. And you will find yourself always mentally, emotionally, even physically exhausted, not because you've done something good or effective, but because you are not congruent with your life priorities. And when we begin to have those aligned, our outlook is different. Our sense of energy is different because we're congruent with our design. Another one that I joke about for myself, I am not highly athletic in terms of sports. And it used to be that because it was a fun activity and social activity, to go play basketball with friends, just go to court and shoot for fun or whatever. Well, quickly realized that that is not my strength, partly because of my height and partly because that's not my talent. And so rather than putting myself in that situation, thinking that it's going to be a positive input in my life, I realized that if there's an alternative way to have that fun, that social time in a different setting, that I'm better off to do that. Now, bear in mind, again, this is not about being selfish. It's about understanding. And there are times that I have and may even still go play some basketball with friends because that's the way it works out. But if nothing else, I go into it with the realization that I'm going to not be the star of the game during this social activity, and even the possibility that I'm going to be laughed at. And I've got to be willing to laugh with people at who I am, because who I am is okay. And so we just got to set priorities based on our design and purpose. And I'll tell you, another component of this that factors in is a sense of our value. And this is something that I say on a regular basis because it needs to be said, because it's important. But sometimes we choose priorities based on trying to feel valuable. We somehow think that if I do this something, then people are going to think I'm more valuable. They're going to like me more. They're going to see me as having value in their eyes, whatever. And that's a wrong way to set priority, because our values have been established for us, and that was done when we were created. As a human, every one of us, everyone has value. It's an intrinsic value that we don't earn. And the good news is, since we can't earn it, we can't lose it. And no one else, no other human being gives us that value, so they can't take it away. Our value is in being a created human being given to us by our Creator, and nothing we do or in nothing anyone else says can change that value. It's established. And so as we make choices, as we set priorities, the goal is not to make ourselves more valuable or more important. We can't do it. It's already established, and we have as much value as there is. And every human being has that. So if you find yourself deciding your priorities based on, well, this will make me more successful, more valuable, make people think of me better, whatever, then we are trying to set priorities based on obtaining value. And that's done. It's already established. So once we realize that we don't have to establish our value, we can improve our value because it's already greater than it can ever be. So if we stop doing that and we set our priorities knowing who we are, who we're designed to be, and the purpose we're here for, then we are going to be much more content, and quite often it's going to help us avoid feeling like failure. Many of us feel like failures because of this misalignment and not recognizing that our values established. And once we can set our priorities free of trying to prove our value, the better we are. So alignment of priorities, there's a lot to it, but once you begin to take the journey based on our design and purpose and driven by vision, mission, and values, your priorities become natural. You're not struggling. You're not dreading this or that. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean it's coasting down the road, because part of what is designed for us is including adversity and dealing with that. And when we are, by the way, when our priorities are correct and aligned with who we're designed to be, going through adversity and struggling with the issues of life become much better, because as we face those from a place of strength of knowing our value is unchangeable, it's already there, and that we are operating the way we should based on our design and purpose, then we don't become defeated going through these challenges and adversities. We don't question ourselves. So we maintain hope, and then we can work through them because we know that these challenges don't define us. They aren't us. They are part of what we deal with in life. And so, again, our priorities are so important to be established well based on our design and purpose, and driven by our vision, mission, and values. Welcome, Richard. Glad to have you. Good question. Richard's question is, we have a pre-existing value. Indeed. And that value is the ultimate precious value. We are, to put it in current terms, we're priceless. We are priceless. We are so valuable, and that's because we've been given that value by our Creator. And our Creator values us more than anything around, more than any other aspect of what is creation. We are the most valued of creation. And so, yes, we have a value given to us that is best described as priceless. And as a result, we don't have to prove our value by what we do or don't do, or what others say or don't say, or the like. Welcome, Lee. Glad to have you with us. Okay. Can values be changed? Okay. Let me make a distinction between value, who we are, what we are, versus values. And if I'm hearing your question correctly, yes, values can be changed. And I would suggest that as we grow an understanding of who we are, who we've been created to be, our values, which to me is our expressed priorities, and it's usually based in moral value, has to be adjusted. Because as I have grown as a person, and I know many people this way, at one point they may have a value that one behavior is acceptable and not a problem, that as they grow into their design and purpose, their value may change to a point. And there are things in my life where I've had to establish a value, and the value is this: there are things that other people can do, and it's okay, not immoral, not illegal. Other people can do that I cannot, based in the values that I have found for me in my life. And those values ultimately need to be made in our design. And by a part of that design is a moral compass, which, just for the record, we all have a moral compass. Now, many of us have chosen to ignore that compass. Some of us have taken it out and thrown it on the ground and stomped on it. But we are designed with a moral compass. And yes, values can change. Sometimes they should be. Other times, though, once we have learned and established our values and have clear understanding, there are moments that those values will determine that, or we will determine that that's an unchanging value, and that helps us set our priorities. If someone wants us to do something, or a job requires us to do something that is against our core values, then there's not a lot of decision to be made. That it's a non-completer. It's a no-go, as we say in the military. But if you have a value that is not congruent with your design and purpose, it ought to be changed, certainly. And just a practical tip, by the way, our core values of what are non-negotiables and what we considered unchangeable, we need to be a short list and need to be very solidly based on good principle, good moral principle. And so I hope I answered your question there, Lee. Yes, values can be changed, and at time should be. So going back to where we started, priorities. Setting priorities in our life can make such a difference when those priorities are set based on our design and our purpose, and driven by vision, mission, and values in our life. Vision, mission, and values is not just a company concept. In fact, those vision, mission, and values, if they are done well, should reflect the founder, CEO, whoever's life values in that organization. Because if we're not congruent in our life, or our work values aren't congruent with our life values, something's wrong. And there's going to be constant conflict. And what I observe in a lot of people in their jobs, their vision and mission and values have no alignment whatsoever with the organizational alignment that they work for. and you're talking about constant conflict. You're talking about constantly regretting our priorities and battling against our priorities. Yeah, I hate this situation that I'm working in so bad. I'm always trying to rush through and get through the week to the weekend. That is a big sign that we have a misalignment of our priorities. Because if our priorities are correct and we made choices such as career choices based on healthy priorities for us, then each day becomes an output of who we are, and it's congruent with who we are. So we're not always looking to run away from it, and becomes very important. You're welcome, Richard. Glad to have you come by, and wish you a good week. So I just encourage us all to consider where our priorities are, not based on cultural norms, not based on others' idea of success, not based on trying to prove our value by fitting in to a situation and so on. When we can make that a normal part of our life, we become much freer because we're living the way we're designed to, and others benefit from that. Whether we want to think about that or not, part of the reason that maybe we have struggles with other people is because, not because of them, but because we are not aligned with our own priorities. We're not happy with the situation. And when we're constantly in turmoil internally because of this misalignment, we tend to be grumpy. That's just a natural outcome. And most of us don't like grumpy people. And yeah, Zaid, that's a common pattern. And that is more people look forward to Friday afternoons than Monday mornings. I appreciate that. I've lived that, but I also know that's not what we are designed for. We are designed for a purpose, and we're part of the design. In alignment with that purpose is our design means we are equipped for that purpose. Again, if we're always struggling because we're trying to live a purpose and we seem to always be short on being equipped mentally, emotionally, physically to do it, it may be that we are trying to establish a purpose based on something other than who we're designed to be. The goal here is ultimately alignment. And the ultimate goal is, in an old-fashioned term, is to be able to live abundantly. And that's not a status of finances. It's not a status of wealth or any of that. Abundance is when we live in congruence with our design and purpose, and that we're driven through our vision, mission, and values, so that as we go and do and be, we are have contentment, even in those hard circumstances in life that we face. So that's what it's about, is being able to live based on good priorities and not be conflicted all the time. That internal conflict is more about not being at peace than the world stage and whether countries are fighting with one another. Because if we are at peace in ourselves, the other things take on the right perspective. Welcome. Hope I pronounced correctly. Anarada, appreciate there. And yet your comment about self-actualization and transcendence. In many ways, when we live based on our design and purpose, we do become actualized because we're in congruence with who we are meant to be. And it does take on a form of transcendence because our contentment, our joy becomes then not based on our circumstances, but based on being who we're designed to be with the purpose that we're designed to be in. And so, yes, what I'm talking about is actually related to that. And so I hope that giving you some wisdom a bit on the idea of setting priorities, not just setting them, but living them. And as we begin to do that, another benefit, by the way, is stress levels. Okay, when we are not living the priority we're designed and have as a purpose, our stress level is at a constant state of elevation. And that creates a whole nother set of troubles. So figure out what is your priority, but figure it out not based on what is set in our cultures. Our cultures shouldn't drive what we do. We should help establish culture by being congruent with our design and purpose and living priorities in accordance. That's the goal. That's where we gain wisdom. And when we begin to see and do things properly in accordance with our design and purpose and set our priorities accordingly, the world looks very different to us. And by the way, others as well. Because when we do that, there's a greater likelihood that you're going to live more harmonious with others, partly because when we establish our priorities based on design and purpose, we are, and recognize that our value is already established, we tend not to try to have conflict with others based on, well, they don't do it the way I do, and so there's a problem, or their design and purpose is different from mine, so they're wrong. When we begin to understand and live our design and purpose and let it set our priorities, we get along with people much better as well. And again, it's based in a principle that's been around for thousands of years. And so it's becomes a key value in having healthy relationships, being able to set boundaries and not necessarily be disagreeable by doing so, and not necessarily hurt other people by doing so. Will it happen sometimes? Of course, because we're all human. So my prayer for you all is that you will gain wisdom in the area of setting your priorities and living them, not just setting them, but living your priorities based on your design and purpose and guided by your vision, mission, and values. And when you do that, every day becomes a day that you can enjoy, revel in, and be present for, rather than always thinking, well, if I can get through till Friday, I'll be all right. No, live each day fully and be present, because it's part of who you are and what you're designed to be. So hope this has been meaningful. Hope you'll come back next week. Join us for the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. And if you have topics that you want addressed as part of the podcast, of course, feel free to suggest them. Z will attest that we are responsive to that, because Z has been very just some things. And so, yes, indeed. Z makes a comment. What is this? The rat chase is never meant to be lived. Indeed. It's that's not living. That's barely surviving. And it is generally pretty miserable. So thanks, everyone. Hope you'll be back next week, Monday morning, 8 o'clock Eastern time, LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on YouTube. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you can certainly join on either of those outlets. And then I will post on LinkedIn a link to this recording for those that want to join it or watch it and participate later. Thank you, everyone. God bless for an amazing week. Look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye.